Hello and welcome back to Stadium Stats. This week we'll be going over my predictions going into Week 8, followed by my top 10 power rankings also going into Week 8. So, let's begin. On Thursday Night Football, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the Buffalo Bills. And the Bills just lost a heartbreaker to what everybody must have thought was one of the worst teams in the league, the Patriots. They played them really close, but in the end, they did lose, and it was not a great showing from the Bills. They've now nearly lost 3 in a row as they lost to the Jaguars and then played really close to the Giants and only won off the last play, and then they lost to the Patriots. Those last two teams, both of which are not very good, so neither of those looked very good for the Bills. But they started off the season really strong, so it's a little confusing as to where they're at. As for the Buccaneers, they just lost a really close game to the Falcons, 16-13. It is a divisional matchup, so they do tend to play pretty close, but the Falcons are not that great of a team. The Buccaneers now have a 3-3 record, and they're just mediocre. Baker Mayfield started off the season really good and has only gotten worse as the season's progressed. But I do think I have the Bills taking this one. But I said that last week over the Patriots, and I thought that was a given. So I'm not going to say this is a given, but I do think the Bills will come out on top. Jumping into our first Sunday game, we have the New York Jets taking on the New York Giants. And both of these teams have had their struggles this season. But the Giants are coming off a nice win over the Commanders. Tyrod Taylor played over Daniel Jones because Daniel Jones is out with a neck injury. And Tyrod Taylor scored a couple touchdowns, didn't throw any interceptions. They finally won a game. All their offensive weapons, Jalen Hyatt, their rookie, Saquon Barkley, they're all Darren Waller, all of them are looking really good. Their defense looked much improved as well, also against the Bills the week before. So I do think the Giants are on the up, but they're still not a very good team. They're starting Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, or maybe Daniel Jones will be back, but neither of those are too hype of a quarterback to be having. As for the Jets are coming off a bye week. They did just beat the Philadelphia Eagles, who that is their only loss. They are now 5-1, the Eagles. So that was a really impressive win. Zach Wilson has only gotten better throughout the season. I do think the Jets will have this. Their defense is just so good, and their offense with Breece Hall looks really nice. Zach Wilson doesn't look terrible. But I do think this will be a close game, as both of these teams have had their ups and downs throughout the season. Our next game is the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers are 4-2. Both teams are coming off of a win. Jags are 5-2. So they're both looking relatively decent. However, the Steelers' offense is not that great. The Jaguars' offense also hasn't been that great either, but they both have really dominant defenses, and the Jaguars have way more potential on offense. So I do think that will be the deciding factor here, is that the Steelers oftentimes look really sluggish on offense. Najee Harris has not been playing very well. Their run game as a whole hasn't been great, although Jaylen Warren has been an improvement. The receiving game, now that Deontay Johnson is back, maybe it will look better, but Kenny Pickett hasn't looked that great this season. As for the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence has looked really good. Christian Kirk consistently looks good, but Calvin Ridley's been missing. And Zay Jones has been out for several weeks. So it's really just been Christian Kirk and Travis Etienne, who has 3 weeks in a row of 2 touchdowns. I do think the Jaguars' offense beats the Steelers' offense, and they both have really good defenses, so I do think the Jaguars will win this. Up next, we have a divisional matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Washington Commanders. The Eagles coming off a win over the Dolphins. Big win because the Dolphins are a really good team as well. The Eagles, huge bounce back after their loss to the Jets. They are now one of the only 2 6-1 teams in the league. They did play the Commanders really close, though, last time. And even though the Commanders did just lose to the Giants, they always play the Eagles really close. I do think the Eagles are a much better team than the Commanders, and therefore will probably win, but I do see this being a very close game. Our next game is the LA Rams versus the Dallas Cowboys, and the Cowboys just had a bye. They have looked really up and down all season, as they looked really good in the first few weeks. Their defense was super dominant, and then they had the terrible outing against the Cardinals and lost, and eventually had a terrible outing against the 49ers and got destroyed. But I do still see a lot of hope for this team. Their defense can be really dominant, although Trayvon Diggs is out for season, which was a huge loss. Their offense with Tony Pollard and Brandon Cooks and CeeDee Lamb can be really, really explosive. As long as Dak is not throwing interceptions, they look like a good team. The Rams, Puka Nacua continues to impress in his rookie season. A fifth-round rookie that seemingly came out of nowhere, just looks incredible and is in the top 5 leaders for receiving yards on the season. Cooper Kupp didn't do very much last week against the Steelers. They did lose in heartbreaking fashion with a last-minute touchdown for the Steelers. But I do think the Rams' offense is pretty good. Their defense is mediocre, but their offense is pretty good with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Losing Kyren Williams definitely did hurt, but Darrell Henderson has been playing well in his absence. I do think this is another close matchup, but I do have the Cowboys coming out with a victory here. Moving into another divisional matchup, we've got the Minnesota Vikings versus the Green Bay Packers. The Packers, coming off back-to-back losses to AFC West teams, they lost to the Raiders and now have lost to the Broncos. The Broncos being one of the worst teams in the league. The Raiders not being very good themselves either. The Packers have looked pitiful. Jordan Love has thrown multiple interceptions in each of the last few games. Their play calling is really poor. Aaron Jones is barely being utilized. Their defense, which on paper seems so great, has only been good at best. The Vikings, on the other hand, just took down the 49ers, a team that everybody had in the top of their rankings for most of the season. The Vikings really did impress with that game. Kirk Cousins looked incredible. Over 450 yards of offense for that team. The run game looked improved. Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson really stepped up in Justin Jefferson's absence. And I do think that and their defense also stepped up big time. I do think that the Vikings offense will be too much for the Packers defense to handle, and the Packers offense will not make up for it. So I do have the Vikings winning this one. Up next, we've got the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Tennessee Titans. The Falcons coming off a big divisional win over the Buccaneers. They are now 4-3. The Titans had a bye week. But was it really a bye week? They traded away one of their star defensive players, Kevin Byard, their safety, to the Eagles for pennies on the dollar. But they are still technically in the race for their division. So are the Falcons. But the Falcons have a lot more offensive firepower. The Titans have less receiving yards as an entire receiving core than A.J. Brown does himself, which is really, really poor on their end, especially considering they traded for DeAndre Hopkins. So if the Titans defense can keep them in games, that would be great, but they just traded away their star safety. I really don't have a lot of hope for this Titans team the rest of the season. And while this Falcons team is only decent, Kyle Pitts and Drake London have been stepping up a lot lately, but Desmond Ridder keeps turning the ball over. I do think the Falcons are a better team, as the Titans are really not doing much to impress. Next, we have another divisional matchup in the Miami Dolphins taking on the New England Patriots. The Dolphins coming off a heartbreaking loss to the Eagles. Not a single call went their way the entire game. However, they did still lose fairly. The Patriots did just come off a big win over the Bills. They do still look really sluggish. Their offense is not that good. Mac Jones did look much improved in that game, but I don't want to give him too much credit yet, as the 2 weeks before they scored a combined 3 points and got outscored by almost 70. The Dolphins have shown so much potential this season, but have yet to beat a really good team. They've already beaten the Patriots once this season, and I do think they're going to do it again. I don't think this will be that close of a game, but the Patriots do tend to play the Dolphins relatively close. But the Dolphins are a much better team. Dolphins win. Up next, we have the New Orleans Saints taking on the Indianapolis Colts. Both teams coming off heartbreaking losses. The Saints coming off a loss to the Jaguars on Thursday Night Football in a game that they were in for a majority of the time. Their defense played well up until the end when they let up a huge touchdown to Christian Kirk. Their offense it's just not clicking as much as people would have thought when Derek Carr got signed by them. Derek Carr was supposed to really push this offense to new limits, and he just hasn't done that. He did throw for over 300 yards in each of the last 2 games, which has been great, but he just keeps checking the ball down to Alvin Kamara, and there's a lot of 3-and-outs as a result. The Colts just had a very impressive showing against the Browns. The Browns defense was on historic pace for the least amount of yards in the Super Bowl era through 5 games, and then the Colts put up over 30 points on them the following week after the Niners only put up 17 on them. The Colts really impressed this week. Their offense looked really good. Josh Downs, their rookie receiver, looked incredible. Michael Pittman continues to look really good. Jonathan Taylor is finally fully back. They were giving him a bulk load again, although Zach Moss is still a part of that running back committee. But this Colts offense is really explosive, and their defense looks far improved, as well as their offensive line from last year. I do think the Colts are going to win this in a tight game. Colts win. Moving on, we've got the Houston Texans taking on the Carolina Panthers. The Texans looking like one of the most improved teams in the league from last year to this year. Their offense with C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud has looked amazing. He did finally throw his first interception, but that's expected. He's a rookie. He set the all-time rookie record for most amount of passing attempts to start a career without throwing an interception. Tank Dell and Robert Woods and Nico Collins are making up a great receiving core with tight end Dalton Schultz. Their run game really hasn't gotten going that much, but their defense also looks much improved from last year. I think this Texans team can go pretty far, honestly, this year, and they're kind of competing in their own division, again, although the Jaguars have pulled ahead, especially with the Texans just coming off a bye. The Panthers, on the other hand, they also are coming off a bye, but they have not won a game yet this season. I don't see that changing against the Texans, as the Texans are far superior to the Panthers' skill. The Panthers' defense has not played very well. Their offense has played even worse, although I will say that Bryce Young has continued to improve throughout the season, and I do think he will continue to improve for the rest of the season. So that does give that team a little bit of hope, but I do think the Texans will win. Up next, we've got the Cleveland Browns taking on the Seattle Seahawks. The Browns coming off a really close win against the Colts, in which they looked really good on offense and also really good on defense, but also bad on both of them at the same time because they let up so many points to the Colts, but they did have multiple takeaways, and they also had P.J. Walker in at quarterback, who outplayed Deshaun Watson when Deshaun Watson was in the game for a little bit and then got taken out for P.J. Walker, and P.J. Walker didn't play very well, but they still won on offense. It was a really confusing game from the Browns. I really don't have much of a takeaway besides the fact that they let up so many points after having let up so few yards and points throughout the season. The Seahawks, on the other hand, coming off a win over the Cardinals. It was not even an impressive win, as they really struggled in the offense for the second week in a row in the red zone. Kenneth Walker did set a season high in rushing yards. Their run game looks really good, but they cannot score in the red zone. DK Metcalf did miss this game, which did not help, but Tyler Lockett did not step up in his place. Instead, Jackson Smith-Njigba and Jake Bobo, their 2 rookie receivers, both did step up a little bit. They both did pretty well. But I don't think that this offense has done as well as it should be doing in the red zone. This is going to be a really close matchup. The Browns defense versus the Seahawks offense. Seahawks defense is really unimpressive, and the Browns offense has been really unimpressive. But I do think the Seahawks will slightly outpace the Browns. Up next, we have a really interesting matchup. The Cincinnati Bengals taking on the San Francisco 49ers. The Bengals coming off a bye week. They finally seem to have turned things around after starting with a 1-2 record. They're now 3-3. Joe Burrow finally looking like himself again. Jamar Chase looking really good finally again. Although T. Higgins has missed some time, I'm not sure if he's even going to play this week with his rib injury. And even when he has played, he hasn't looked that good. Joe Mixon hasn't really done too much work this year. He hasn't looked that great on the ground. But their defense has really stepped up in these past few weeks, and their offense has turned it around. The 49ers, on the other hand, have gone the other direction. They started off 5-0 and then lost back-to-back games against the Browns and the Vikings. The Vikings, not even an impressive team, as they were 2-4 going into that game. The 49ers have shown a lot of vulnerability on both offense and defense, as Kirk Cousins torched their defense for over 400 yards on Monday Night Football, and their offense Purdy has shown that without all of his weapons, with Debo missing time and with McCaffrey missing a little bit of time as well, he's started making mistakes. He's thrown a couple interceptions in the past 2 weeks, and it's really cost this team some wins. I do think the 49ers are a slightly better team, but the Bengals are on a swing up while the 49ers are only going down. So I do think this is going to be a really close game, but I have the Niners squeezing out with a win. Up next, we have another divisional matchup in the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Broncos. The Denver Broncos coming off a win over the Green Bay Packers. They looked all right. Their defense has looked much improved over the past few weeks, as they're no longer the worst scoring defense in the league, through the past few weeks. Their offense has looked okay at best. Russell Wilson has looked mediocre. They don't really have any star receivers, although Courtland Sutton has really stepped up especially last week. They're missing their starting tight end. Javonte Williams is finally seeming to get a little bit more healthy. He finally had a good game last week. I do think that they're going to be improved from where they were at the beginning of the season, but they're taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. This is not going to be a close game. Kansas City always beats them. They've lost 16 in a row, and the Chiefs just had a huge divisional win over the Chargers, who are a much better team than the Broncos. Chiefs win. It's not going to be close. Up next, we have a bird matchup between the Ravens and the Cardinals. The Ravens coming off a massive win over the Lions. A lot of people had the Lions winning, thinking they were one of the best teams in the league, and the Ravens shut that down immediately. They won 38-6, and it was never close in that game at any point, and they even took their foot off the gas pedal and still won by that much. It was not close. The Lions are a really good team, and it was a really impressive win. Lamar Jackson threw for over 350 yards and had 4 total touchdowns. He looked like he was in MVP form. Zay Flowers continues to impress. Odell Beckham Jr. got involved. Mark Andrews had multiple touchdowns on National Tight Ends Day. That whole offense was firing. Gus Edwards and Justice Hill took it down in the run game. They looked amazing on offense. They looked amazing on defense. No complaints for the Ravens. The Cardinals, on the other hand, did just lose 10-20 to the Seattle Seahawks, and that's with the Seahawks having an interception and also not being able to score at all in the red zone. The Cardinals still did not win that game. The Cardinals are a bad team and are finally playing like it. The Ravens are going to win this. It's not going to be close either. Up next, we have the Chicago Bears taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. Both teams coming off a win. The Bears won 30-12 over the Raiders. Both teams had backup quarterbacks, as Tyson Bagent was in for Justin Fields with a dislocated thumb, and Jimmy Garoppolo was out with a back injury, so Brian Hoyer played. And eventually, Aiden O'Connell ended up coming in to replace Brian Hoyer. The Bears were winning the whole game. It was never really close. Deontay Foreman had 3 touchdowns. Their defense looked far improved. It was against a pitiful Raiders team, especially with Brian Hoyer at quarterback, but it was a promising win for the Bears, especially with a D2 rookie quarterback at quarterback. No D2 quarterback had won a game since 2010. It was really impressive for Tyson Bagent, even though he didn't do anything exceptional. The Chargers, on the other hand, coming off a loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, 17-31. They looked pretty good in the first half, and then Justin Herbert looked kind of pitiful in the second half. They did have a good receiving core, as Joshua Palmer really stepped up. He had 130 yards, and Keenan Allen, always looking really good, continues to really impress this season. The Chargers are a better team than the Bears, but neither record really shows that either team looks better. I do think the Chargers will win this game. I don't even think it will be that close of a matchup, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears ended up winning, but Chargers should. And then our last game on Monday Night Football, we've got the Las Vegas Raiders taking on the Detroit Lions. The Raiders, coming off a big loss to the Chicago Bears, who aren't a very good team. I'm not sure if Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be playing or if it will be Brian Hoyer again. If it is Brian Hoyer, there's really no hope. Even if it's Jimmy Garoppolo, there's still minimal hope. They're going up a much better NFC North team in the Detroit Lions, and they just lost to the Bears in the same division, who are a much worse team. But yes, the Lions are coming off a heartbreaking loss, but their offense still looked decent. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs both looked really good. Sam Laporta continues to impress every single game of the season. And the Lions are a really good football team, even with that big loss to the Ravens. The Lions are going to win this. It's not going to be a close game. Now getting into my Week 8 power rankings. At number 10, I've got the Dallas Cowboys. As I was saying, the Cowboys started off the season really strong, have had a few poor showings against the Cardinals and the 49ers, but have shown that they are a really good team on both offense and defense. They can really get the job done. It's just they're not a team I have a lot of faith in, as every single year they prove that they're not a team worth having faith in, and also they blow games like they did against a bad team in the Cardinals, or like they did in the blowout win to the 49ers, or loss to the 49ers. And at number 9, I've got the Seattle Seahawks. Their red zone offense is the main thing that's been holding them back lately, as they're really struggling to score in the red zone. Their run game, though, looks electric with Kenneth Walker. Zach Charbonnet is a good backup. They've also got a really good receiving trio of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Their defense isn't very great, but it's good enough, and it's an improved unit from last year. I do think the Seahawks are a really good team, but they need to fix their red zone offense before I can put them any higher. In at number 8, I've got the Cleveland Browns. They have had one of the best defenses in the league through their first 5 games. And then in week 7, they looked really bad on defense, but still got the job done against the Colts in a really high-scoring affair. I do think the Browns have a lot of really great skilled players, and don't even get me started on Myles Garrett. He might be one of the best defensive players in the entire league. He's in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. He had an incredible game last week with 2 forced fumbles, 2 sacks, and a blocked field goal. He looked incredible. That whole defense continues to look really good, even with letting up a ton of points to the Colts. And they look like a really good defensive team. But their offense has had some struggles. Deshaun Watson has really struggled this season. He's also really been in and out of games with his injury. PJ Walker has been all right as a backup, but nothing more. And at number 7, we've got the Detroit Lions. They looked vulnerable against the Ravens. The Ravens really exposed them, but the Lions have been a good team week in and week out. They beat the Kansas City Chiefs in week 1. Their only other losses is in a really close game to the Seahawks in week 2. And I do still have faith in this Lions team, but this really showed the flaws in their potential, as they really did lose really badly to the Ravens. And at number 6, I've got the Jacksonville Jaguars. They just came off another win, moving them to 5-2 after having beaten the Bills in the previous week. They look like they're improving on offense, and their defense is really electric. Josh Allen on defense has been so good. The only disappointment has been the lack of development from their first overall pick last year in Trayvon Walker. He has not looked that good this season, but Trevor Lawrence continues to improve. Christian Kirk has been really consistent, and if Calvin Ridley could start showing up more consistently, I think this team could be really complete on both offense and defense. And at number 5, I've got the Miami Dolphins. They just lost a really bad game to the Philadelphia Eagles, although no calls went their way the entire night. It was a really heartbreaking loss for them. Tua, throughout the whole season, has looked really good, although he looked a lot worse in this most recent game. Tyreek Hill is leading the league in receiving yards, and Jalen Waddle is finally back and healthy and playing really well. This team has so much potential. Raheem Mostert as their running back has also been incredible. He leads the league in rushing touchdowns and overall touchdowns. However, the loss of Devon Achane did hurt, and they have yet to prove anything against a really good team, as they've lost to both good teams they've played in the Bills and the Eagles. I want to see more from this team before I can put them up higher against a really good team, but I do think this team is really explosive and has a lot of potential. And at number 4, I've got the San Francisco 49ers. They were 5-0 and seemed undefeatable at one point, and then lost back-to-back games, once to their poor kicking and once to their poor offense and defense against the Vikings on primetime. They looked vulnerable. Brock Purdy has started throwing interceptions. They're really missing Debo and Trent Williams, as those losses due to injury have been really impactful to their offense. Trent Williams is the best tackle in the game, and their offensive line has really shown regression without him. And Debo Samuel really does take a lot of the pressure off of Brandon Ayuk and helps open up Brandon Ayuk's receiving game and George Kittle's receiving game. Kittle did step up a lot in Debo's absence, but it was not exactly the showing you wanted to see from Brock Purdy, who looked really good up until the last 5 minutes where he threw 2 interceptions. In at number 3, I've got the Baltimore Ravens, and they just had arguably the most impressive performance of the entire season. They demolished the Detroit Lions 38-6. It was never a close game. Lamar Jackson was able to do anything he wanted with that Lions defense. The offense was firing on all cylinders. Zay Flowers looked really good. Mark Andrews looked really good. Odell Beckham Jr. looked like he was a lot younger and playing well again. And this team has so much potential with Lamar playing at the level he's been playing at. Their defense is electric. They held the Lions to 6 points. It was a really impressive showing, and I have a lot of faith in this team going forward. And at number 2, we've got the first of our 6-1 teams, the Philadelphia Eagles, coming off an impressive win over the Miami Dolphins. They took down a team in the Dolphins that everybody thought was one of the most explosive teams the whole year, and they held them to only 17 points. It was a really, really impressive showing from the Eagles' defense, and their offense still put up 31 points against that Dolphins defense, which hasn't been elite, but it was good to see a rebound for this Philadelphia offense, as the previous week was really rough against the Jets. Jalen Hurts looked much improved this week. The tush push seems unstoppable on 4th and 1 situations, and they really are a complete team between their offense and defense. And up in number 1, it's the Kansas City Chiefs. They're back to number 1. Patrick Mahomes threw for over 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. Travis Kelce had over 180 receiving yards and a touchdown. He looks amazing regardless, but when Taylor Swift is there, he looks even better. They even showed that stat on the screen that he's had over twice the amount of yards in games she's been there as opposed to games she hasn't been. It's a stupid statistic, but it exists. And this team looks unstoppable, as they do year in and year out. There's a reason they're one of the best franchises of the entire decade. They're unstoppable. Patrick Mahomes is unstoppable. Travis Kelce's unstoppable. Their defense has looked so good this year, better than I've seen in any year past. This team is going far, just like they do every year, and I wouldn't be surprised if they won it all. That'll be it for this week. I'll catch you guys next week. Goodbye. Thanks for watching.